saving provides is not really an issue. It doesn't need to happen.
Perhaps Holly? We could have the North and South Islands on different time zones.
Oh, yes.
That's just going to end up complicated. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Isla Burgess, who lives in Cromwell. It is just after 5 minutes to 5. We'll fit one more story in. This is the panel. I am Megan Whelan. Joining me today, Holly Walker and Scott Campbell. Well, debauchery and the law, the latest in this ongoing story that we've been covering. University of Otago students have been angered over the cancellation of their law camp, and they've launched a petition calling it for it to be reinstated. The Society of Otago University law students cancelled its annual second-year law camp this week following allegations of nudity and jelly wrestling. First at Otago, now Auckland, but some students are defending the camps, calling them great experiences and saying there was no pressure to take part in embarrassing rituals. How would you have handled this as a student, Holly?
I've been thinking about this a lot because I very nearly was a law student, and I remember at the time in the early 2000s at Otago University thinking if I had to go to law camp, I probably would, because it was legendary for this kind of thing even then, I probably would have felt pressure to drink more than I was comfortable drinking and to do things that I was uncomfortable doing, because it was well known that that was what you would be expected to do. So I was glad that I didn't end up studying law and didn't have to go. But also, this kind of thing did happen on campus, in other ways. Like the Hall of Residence that I lived in had an initiation ritual that was stopped, I think, a couple of years later, but we were woken in the middle of the night. We were driven on a bus out to a beach. We had cold food scraps poured all over us. It was humiliating and horrible, and it was just kind of considered part of it. And the one person who refused to participate, I remember, I was very admiring of her for doing that, but everyone was like, oh, she's no fun.
She's no fun, yeah.
So to be honest, I'm really glad that it's been cancelled, and I do think this needs to change. Doesn't mean that similar events can't happen in the future with a bit more thought and planning into how to keep everybody safe. But I do think as a student I would have done things I was uncomfortable with because I felt like I had to.
At 18, Scott, there's certainly still a degree of peer pressure, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in a similar vein to Holly. I think that as a student, I would have gone along with it as well too, regardless of whether I wanted to or not. I think I would like to hope that times have changed. But if that's actually what is happening and people are still being pressured, then that's definitely not on. And surely there's ways that they can go about having fun and doing these things without needing to go, through those sorts of processes, I guess, or whatever that they're actually doing with these when they're out on these camps. Because that's not on. If you're pressured into doing it, then they shouldn't be doing it. But if it's fun, just don't drink too much. We should be responsible in that place.
I guess it's an indication that times are changing in some ways.
Hopefully.
And for the better, hopefully.
For the better. Thank you so much for joining us today. That is Scott Campbell up in Auckland, and Holly Walker with me for the first time. Will you come back?
Absolutely. Love to.
Thanks for being here with us today. That's the panel. I'm Megan Whelan. Jim will be back tomorrow.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, inside the Canterbury Home Repair Program with a former manager for Fletcher's who says even when extra damage was found, it wasn't always easy to get EQC scopes changed. And that means damage sometimes wasn't repaired even when it had been found. Plus, the State Services Commissioner launches an investigation into whether Southern Response breached integrity and conduct standards when it hired a security contractor. We hear from a furious customer demanding to know if she was spied on. The PM is in Tonga and we are there. And a 73-year-old kaumatua who says she'll now be able to see the dentist instead of pulling her own teeth after her iwi announced plans to provide free private health insurance. All of that and more coming up after the pips, and then the news with Katrina.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and aho. Building surveyors want regulations to ensure houses for sale are inspected thoroughly and problems are picked up. The former Earthquake Commission Minister, Jerry Brownlee, says if Christchurch home buyers find their house has unrepaired quake damage, they need to question the work done by their building inspector, not the Commission. The president of the Institute of Building Surveyors, Darren Devaney, says even experienced inspectors can miss some earthquake damage, but he says people have a better chance with a trained inspector.
What the public need to know is that the pre-purchase industry is completely unregulated. So there's all sorts of people that are carrying out pre-purchase inspections that aren't actually qualified at all.
Darren Devaney, the president of the Institute of Building Surveyors. Southern Response says it hired a security contractor due to increasing threatening behaviour by customers towards staff. The government agency in charge of settling the outstanding quake claims of former AMI customers in Christchurch is under investigation by the public sector watchdog, the State Services Commission. Conan Young reports.
The State Services Commissioner, Peter Hughes, says material he's been given raises questions about whether standards of integrity and conduct for state servants have been breached. He'll announce who will lead the inquiry and its terms of reference next week. Southern Response's chairperson, Ross Butler, says the contractor was hired in 2014 to carry out a security review and assess the level of risk faced by staff. He says staff have a right to work in an environment safe from threats or harm. Ke ototahi ko Conan Young tēnei.
Dunedin man Jason Blackler has been found guilty of manslaughter over the death of his friend and flatmate. Alan Fahey, who was 66, was found dead in their house in the suburb of Brockville in October 2016. At the end of the two-week trial, the jury in the Dunedin High Court has delivered a unanimous guilty verdict. Jason Blackler, who's 48, will be sentenced in late April. The group set up to get agreement for the first marine reserves on the Otago coast has failed to get consensus after 4 years and has handed in 2 different plans. The Ministers of Fisheries and Conservation have just released the final report of the South East Marine Protection Forum, which was formed to identify areas to protect from Timaru down to Southland. The report has 2 separate proposals, one by the environmental and tourism representatives to protect 14% of the coastline and one from the commercial fishing industry proposing cover for 4% of the coast. The ministers say they have made no decision and will carefully consider the recommendations. Locals in Haast are welcoming news the West Coast town will get cell phone coverage this year. Haast on State Highway 6 is in the middle of a 244-kilometre long mobile coverage black spot that runs from Fox Glacier to Lake Hawea. Locals say the black spot means people in serious accidents can't use cell phones to call for help, slowing down response times to emergencies. The Communications Minister, Claire Curran, announced an interim solution today. She says a 3G cell tower will be in the town by the end of May and 6 to 8 small roadside mobile sites will be in place along the highway by the end of the year. Haast Senior Police Constable Paul Gurney says the move will make emergency services more effective.
You know, it can be a car crash, it could be a driving complaint, it could be, I've seen something else, someone floating down the river or out to sea. We can get those calls straight away where before they either wouldn't come in or there'll be a large time delay.
Haas Senior Constable Paul Gurney. It could take another 24 hours before a fire burning through 1,600 tonnes of scrap metal in Auckland is put out, blocking staff from businesses in the area for another day. Fire and Emergency say there are now two diggers at the Sims Pacific Metals Yard in Favona, moving the metal to allow firefighters to get to the heart of the fire. But it says James Fletcher Drive will be closed until at least midday tomorrow. One man says he's worried about his workplace will fare.
I don't know if it's close to the place that I work in, so I'm not really sure what's happening what's the extent of the fire. I've rang my team members and they say I told them to go home, so I am just on standby whatever happens.
A worker near the fire at Sims Pacific Metals in South Auckland. It's 5 past 5. Sport, and New Zealand is up against it in the fourth one-day cricket international against England in Dunedin, chasing 336 to win and keep the series alive. Batting first, England made 335 for 9 with Johnny Bairstow and Joe Root both scoring centuries. The Black Caps got off to a poor start and were 2 for 2 at one stage, but a short time ago had recovered to 107 for 3 after 20 overs with Ross Taylor on 50. New Zealand must win the match to level the 5-match series at 2 games all. New Zealand Rugby League denies the chief executive, Alex Hayton, is the first victim of an independent report into the Kiwis' disastrous World Cup campaign. Hayton today resigned as the organisation's CEO after 2 years in the role. The Kiwis failed to reach semi-finals of last year's World Cup, with shock losses to Fiji and Tonga, prompting an independent review of the failed campaign, which has now been completed. The NZRL chairman, Rion Edwards, says Hayton chose to resign, but wouldn't say whether the review is critical of Hayton's performance.
Well, I can't comment on that. We have to sort of let the review, follow its course. And all I can say is that we're really looking forward to being able to share the findings and the recommendations, and then cracking on with implementing those recommendations.
The chair of New Zealand Rugby League, Rion Edwards. Real Madrid and Liverpool are through to the quarter-finals of the European Champions League after commanding victories. Real, the defending champions, beat Paris Saint-Germain 5-2 on aggregate, while Liverpool beat Porto 5-0. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Tipping celebrates the jazz of Jerome Kern. Dexter Guff continues his search for online affirmation in the mother of all self-help podcasts. We have a window on the world of refugees finding solace through food, and Patrick Phelps is on the line from the Chinese metropolis of Nanjing. This time last year, he was up the road from Haast.
And on Lately at 10, we'll have an eye on books, music, people and politics. And of course, we'll be there for the breaking news stories as they happen. We're live and we'll be keeping you up to date with the world, talking to some of the people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tonight. Northland to Waikato and Bay of Plenty, also Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay. Occasional showers, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms. For the remainder of the North Island, from Waitomo and Southern Hawke's Bay to Wellington and Wairarapa, periods of rain, some heavy with isolated thundery downpours possible in the north. Rain easing west of the main ranges tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy with patchy rain, especially about Golden Bay and coastal Marlborough, clearing tomorrow. Canterbury, fine spells and isolated showers. Buller to Fiordland, fine with high cloud about Buller. Otago and Southland, mainly fine, however a few showers spreading north this afternoon and evening, and a few showers again tomorrow evening. And for the Chatham Islands, rain developing around evening. It's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Later in the program, we go to Washington. We're in Tonga with the Prime Minister. But first of all, tonight we go inside the Canterbury Home Repair Program in an extraordinary interview with a man who supervised day-to-day operations in Christchurch for 4 years after 2011's big February quake. Last night we heard from the former Fletcher Construction CEO who signed the contract with EQC, which put Fletcher's in charge of the program with an EQC indemnity against, and I quote directly from the contract, all costs and expenses FCC may suffer and for any claims made against FCC. Verbatim quote. Mark Binns told us some of the early EQC scopes. That's the original damage assessments were done too quickly and by people not qualified to do them. Now, Jerry Brownlee won't talk to Checkpoint directly, but last night RNZ's Christchurch-based reporter Conan Young asked him to respond to Mark Binns.
I wouldn't make a comment on anything that Mr Binns has said because I haven't seen those comments. I would simply say this, though, that under the arrangements, if a builder was assigned a property to repair and they picked up the scope of works and in the course of doing that work discovered further damage, then they would simply have that work rescoped. That happened in numerous cases because it was never expected, given the scale of what we were dealing with, that you would get perfect scopes on every occasion.
Jerry Brownlee, in short, there was a safety net. If EQC's scopes were wrong, and no one's disputing they sometimes were, contractors would find the damage and change the scopes accordingly. But this works manager, who didn't want to be named, said once they'd been filed, the EQC scopes were very hard to change.
Correct. So, those initial scopes, and unfortunately they should have been called a triage scope. It was a scope to get a real snapshot of the damage in Christchurch and then triage it into different piles. So those which were going to be repaired under EQC's management and those who were going to be repaired, which were overcap and were going to be repaired and managed by the insurance company. Those scopes, they weren't 100% accurate. They weren't good scopes to work off later. And that was a real frustration because, the public weren't told that they were a triage scope. They were told that this was the repairs required to their homes. Yeah. So later on, when we got those scopes in Fletcher EQR, we went out with contractors, and of course the damage didn't match. There was additional damage, or what the builders saw and the supervisors saw was quite different. So those scopes would be rewritten, and then they'd have to go back to EQC to be reviewed, and often what was added was knocked back. It was a frustrating process.
Yes, and the EQC annual report for 2010-2011, which I'm holding here, says in the 4 months after the February quake, 182,000 rapid assessments were completed. 182,000, it's an extraordinary number. Now, you're saying they were snapshots, triage. But what you're also saying is that these rapid assessments became attached to the property and it was very hard to get a variation on them.
Correct. One of the things which you couldn't do would be invasive scoping. So you couldn't actually lift floorboards or take a wall lining off to see what was damaged behind it.
Why not?
Why not? Just because there wasn't time, really. But that was the only way you could discover what was there. And often, this is why scopes changed during the process. Repair was that when the builder did open up that wall and there was additional damage, then there had to be a variation to that scope.
Were builders walking away from projects or signing off on projects, knowing that in fact the work that had been scoped and formally agreed to was insufficient?
I would say yes. And that is frustrating. I mean, there should have been a lot more gypboard replaced in Christchurch than what there is. And gypboard is a one-off use product. When it goes through a event like that, it's done its job.
Sorry, forgive me for interrupting, but absolutely. Are you saying gypboard wasn't replaced? Are you saying it was nailed back up or plastered when there was major cracks or splits in it?
Correct. Yep. Some was replaced. I mean, we didn't get the opportunity to get a property file to look at the plans of the house to see where bracing units were in walls to make sure that they were put back correctly, things like that.
Were your KPIs, were all the drivers you were working under around how many properties were being done, the speed with which they were being done? Correct.
Yeah. So the supervisors, and it got worse, 2013, 2014, and I left in 2015, but the KPIs each month were huge, and it became a dollar thing. We had to, in the hub, we had to be doing $3 or $4 million worth of work a month, and when you broke that down to each supervisor, they had to be signing off X number of jobs of X value each month so that the hub could meet that. The frustrations were there right from the beginning, and it's I know that supervisors and good supervisors, good managers left because of the frustration that there was there.
One final question. When you hear now of properties in which major structural damage, particularly under the floors, is only just being discovered, despite the fact that there were scopes, despite the fact that the EQC repairs have been completed, are you surprised that that is only being discovered now, 7 years on?
No, I'm not surprised, to be honest, John. As in any build, there's good builders and bad builders, and any organisation, there's good people and bad people. Those who will take the shortcuts and those who won't. There just wasn't a lot of information in those early years, 2011, 2012. It was very much a fly-by-wire, very frustrating, it was a very challenging time for all involved, on all sides. Yeah.
That's a former works manager inside the Canterbury Home Repair Program talking to us earlier. Meanwhile, the State Services Commission has launched an investigation into whether the insurer Southern Response breached integrity and conduct standards when it hired a security contractor. The Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, asked the State Services Commission to review information she'd received relating to a security contractor hired by the government agency responsible for settling AMI's earthquake claims. Checkpoint confirmed a short time ago that contractor is Thompson and Clark Investigations. State Services Commissioner Peter Hughes says the material raises questions about whether standards of integrity and conduct for state servants have been breached. Southern Response customer Jean Rath, who's still fighting for a resolution 7 years on, says she's furious and she's written this to her claims manager.
We understand from the news today that Southern Response funded private investigators to find out about insurance claimants. This is clearly very concerning news for everyone with a claim with Southern Response and for ethical government in New Zealand. Please inform us as a matter of urgency whether private investigators have been used to seek or gather any information for Southern Response about us or members of our household. If investigators have been used, then provide us with details of their investigations. And I'm waiting for an answer. Or maybe I'm being paranoid. I don't know. It makes you paranoid when you think that this state-funded organisation set up to actually help those of us who are insured with AMI has actually been spying on people. Quite horrifying. As claimants, as people who paid into insurance so that if something happened, we'd be covered, it does feel like these people are actually, everyone's clipping the ticket. Everyone is ensuring that things take a long time, that things are done incompetently, because every time that something is done incompetently, somebody gets paid to come back and put it right. Every time Southern Response misses off rooms on our repair analysis, somebody else has to come back and they have to come back and check that exists. Every time they don't manage to count the number of piles under the house, they have to come back and check how many are here. Every time they get the drainage layout wrong, which they have done, they have to send somebody else out.
The Southern Response client, Jean Rath, Southern Response would not appear on the program, but in a statement, Board Chairman Ross Butler said the agency would cooperate fully with the State Services inquiry. He said at the time the contractor was engaged in early 2014, Southern Response was acting in response to an escalating level of threatening and aggressive behaviour and communications from customers towards staff. the chief executive directors and the chairman himself. He says given the environment the company was operating in at the time and conscious of its obligations to ensure the safety of its staff, Southern Response sought external assistance for a security review. The contractor was asked to provide independent security advice and assess the risk to Southern Response employees and directors. Now, the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, told me a short time ago she instigated the inquiry.
I asked the State Services Commissioner to have a look at it. He has decided that there are grounds to have a further look at it. There's some serious questions that I want answers to.
How many people was this happening to? How many Southern Response claimants was this happening to prima facie?
Well, look, this is precisely the kind of question that the State Services Commissioner will be looking into. I've raised the questions and that he and his team will now be going away and looking into the matter further.
If you are listening to this and you are a Southern Response customer, remember no one chose to be a Southern Response customer. This was when AMI defaulted. Should you be concerned that if you have been difficult, curmudgeonly, litigious or anything, that you have been pursued by some form of private detective?
Look, I saw concerns and I raised them through the appropriate channels, and that's to get the State Services Commissioner to have a look at that and answer those questions. But what I also want to make sure is that the organisation can get on, in terms of Southern Response, with settling its outstanding claims, because, again, those claimants and those people need to be able to get on with their lives.
Megan Woods, will hear more from her after 6 o'clock tonight, talking about the issues around EQC scoping and what next for the people still trying to get sorted 7 years on. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, where you can also watch us as we go to air, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And those of you who are contacting us in great numbers about your claims in Christchurch, we are endeavouring to get back to you all on a personal basis. Thank you for being in touch. Let's change the subject and go to Washington. Well, Washington and Korea. Donald Trump has reacted cautiously to news that North Korea is willing to talk about giving up its nuclear weapons if it does not feel threatened. The US President described statements coming out of South and North Korea as being very positive, but also said it might be a false hope. South Korea earlier said the subject of its nuclear weapons was raised when officials met the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, on Monday. Seoul said Mr. Kim was also open to US talks and would pause weapons testing. What's it all mean? Well, the BBC's excellent Laura Bicker has the latest from Seoul.
우리 당과 국가 군대의 최고 용도자동직께서는
State television in North Korea declared with a flourish that there would be a special report about Kim Jong-un hosting a banquet for delegates from South Korea. The visit has produced an astonishing turnaround. South Korea's National Security Advisor Chung Yu-yong announced what had been agreed.
The North has clearly affirmed its commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and said it would have no reason to possess nuclear weapons should military threats against North Korea be removed and the safety of its regime guaranteed.
Kim Jong-un will also attend a summit with President Moon at the heavily fortified border, the first between two Korean leaders in more than a decade. And he's promised to halt missile tests to give diplomacy a chance. Most importantly, North Korea has agreed to talk to the United States. President Trump welcomed the possible progress on Twitter, saying it may be false hope, but the US is ready to go hard in any direction. Presumably he means either towards peace talks or military action. Kim Jong-un's change of heart could be due in part to the unpredictability of the US president, who has warned that he's prepared to unleash fire and fury on the state. Others believe stringent US-led sanctions could have dried up cash flow in Pyongyang. It is feared that North Korea is lying and putting on an elaborate front to try to get sanctions lifted and buy time to build more weapons. Or the young leader could be trying to achieve what his father and his grandfather did not, a peace treaty with the South. The problem with North Korea is no one really knows. And here in Seoul, where many remember the effects of war on the peninsula, they are willing to embrace this thawing of relations to see where it might lead.
Well, that's Laura Bicker reporting from Seoul for the BBC. We're just going to change the subject entirely because we've been joined in the studio by Zach Fleming, who has a report that you've just obtained a short time ago. Zach, I'm going to look at you as we discuss this report. This is about the killing of Grizz, the aviation security dog, at Auckland Airport last March. So a year ago.
Almost a year ago.
It was entirely avoidable, according to a report that you've just obtained. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, Grizz, a 10-month-old bearded collie?
Yeah.
German short-haired pointer cross, escaped his aviation security handler, ran onto the airport runway, leading to police ultimately shooting him. Zach, you just got the report. What's it say?
I think it's also important to remember that there was a lot of outrage for people who are familiar with the story when it happened, people asking why wasn't he tranquilised, and no one would release any information. So it's taken nearly a year for anyone to tell us what's happened, and what happened was a whole list of mistakes. So Grizz wasn't on a leash when he was being moved from his kennel. There also wasn't a fence around the kennel area so he could escape, and then the gate going in and out of aviation security was hard to open, so they just used to leave it open all the time when cars would go in. Then after Grizz had escaped, there was a number of failings, like the person who should have been called to help coordinate the rescue wasn't called on time. They didn't activate the emergency operations centre. So there was a whole raft of errors that were made, and then ultimately they decided not to tranquilise him because they weren't sure on what dosage to use. So they decided to shoot him with a gun instead of try with a tranquiliser.
Does the report have recommendations? Would it be fair to say this is a fairly damning report? Your praise of it makes it sound like it's not a ringing endorsement of their conduct.
Fairly damning, yes. There have been quite a lot of recommendations made, and to be fair, aviation security in Auckland Airport have adopted almost all of those recommendations. Some of the ones that they haven't adopted, though, are using things like GPS collars on airport dogs so that when they do run away, they find them straight away. And using reflective collars, but Auckland Airport does now have a net gun to use on dogs, so that if a dog does escape, we don't need to shoot another one again. But yeah. Yeah.
So to summarise, they could have done a lot better, and they're promising to in future.
To summarise, basically, Grizz's death was completely avoidable.
Zach Fleming, thank you with that report just coming in. Really appreciate it. Zach Grizz, the dog, shot last year. Of course, there are a lot of dogs at airports sniffing around for things people shouldn't be carrying. It's 27 minutes past 5. It's something city slickers often take for granted, the ability to use mobile phones anytime they want. But a 247-kilometre stretch of road on South Island's west coast between Lake Hawea and Fox Glacier has no mobile coverage. And in the middle of that big black spot is the rural town of Haast. Haast is the black spot. Haast locals say the black spot has caused huge challenges for emergency services, with people involved in serious car crashes along the busy tourist route having no way to call for help. Today, the government announced Haast and parts of the surrounding highway will finally get cell phone coverage this year, a move that's expected to save lives. Maya Burry reports.
Haast Senior Police Constable Paul Gurney often responds to car crashes on State Highway 6 between Lake Hawea and Fox Glacier. But a lack of mobile coverage and accessible landlines in the area means Mr Gurney usually finds out about the accidents when someone arrives at his door.
Well, if there's a serious crash, if there's one right now, someone's either going to drive into my station here, which could take them up to an hour, depending on where it's happened, or somewhere else, and they'll knock on the door and hopefully someone's here, or find a business that's open, but there's only so many businesses, so yeah, that's what we're waiting for, and I get that regularly. I'll be sitting here at the desk and I'll see a car or a truck scream up to the office, and I know what's coming. There's going to be a crash report here, and 9 times out of 10 it is.
Paul Gurney says medical attention within the first hour of an accident can literally make a life or death difference. But he says at the moment it can be hard to arrive at the scene of an accident that quickly.
Several years ago now there was a crash and she was bundled into a car and brought into the township where, because of internal injury, she subsequently died. And they couldn't make a phone call at the time. They didn't know where to go. We've got some tourists that didn't know where. There's no one there to talk to, and very remote. If they had that ability, their phones would have worked. They could have got that call out and we could have been to them within 25 minutes.
On a visit to Haast today, the Communications Minister, Claire Curran, announced an interim solution to the mobile black spot. She said a 3G cell tower will be operational in the town by the end of May, and 6 to 8 small roadside mobile sites will be placed along the highway by the end of the year. She says a long-term solution, using 4G mobile technology that will provide reception along bigger stretches of the highway, will be in place by 2022.
The interim
solution means that you'll be driving along, you'll come across a point of connectivity that will last for about 500 metres to a kilometre, and then there'll be a gap until you get to the next one. It's not ideal, but it's a lot better than is there now. Currently, you can drive for nearly 250 kilometres and not be able to make a mobile phone call. That's just not acceptable in 2018.
Ms Curran says the West Coast town is one of more than 100 rural communities that are set to get cell phone coverage by 2022, subsidised by a mobile black spot fund that was announced by the previous government. Ms Curran says providing coverage in tourism locations will enhance the experience of visitors. Blair Farmer, a local business owner and St John volunteer, is applauding the announcement and hopes it will make tourists stay for longer.
They believe that if there is no reception, there is nothing exists here. So they just drive on through. And Haast has so much to offer here with the way of our wilderness and our rivers and our wildlife and our everything. They're missing out on that because they don't believe it's here, because their jolly wee phone that is their life says there is no connectivity.
And Mr Farmer expects there will be lots of people in Haast investing in a new cell phone.
We've all got $25 ones that are about 10 years old that we use when we go out the other side, but yeah, we're going to have to step up from them now. There's going to be, those shops are going to do jolly well for a while, yeah.
The construction of the cell tower and roadside mobile sites is expected to cost about $900,000. The yearly operating costs, that include paying for the satellite technology needed for cell phone communication, is expected to be about $1 million. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
Coming up on Checkpoint, the Prime Minister spends the day in Tonga visiting a school that was badly damaged by Cyclone Gita. Amy Adams is Crown National's new finance spokesperson. Remember, Stephen Joyce announced he was going yesterday, and a 73-year-old says she'll now be able to see the dentist for the first time instead of pulling out her own teeth. After her Auckland iwi announced plans to provide free private health insurance for all its members. Nona is back on my right-hand side to do business after Katrina on my left-hand side does the headlines.
The Institute of Building Surveyors wants inspections of houses for sale to be regulated to make sure they're thorough. But the organisation admits even experienced inspectors can miss internal earthquake damage. It follows the former Earthquake Commission Minister, Jerry Brownlee, saying Christchurch home buyers should question building inspectors, not the EQC, if their quake-damaged house hasn't been repaired. The chair of a group set up to get consensus on marine reserves for Otago says it proved impossible to bridge the conflicting views. In its final report released today, the South East Marine Protection Forum has given two different proposals to the Ministers of Fisheries and Conservation. The ministers have just released the final report and say they have made no decision. The man accused of murdering Dunedin teenager Amber Rose Rush will go to the Court of Appeal to argue for name suppression. The 30-year-old appeared in the Dunedin District Court yesterday to face one charge of murder, 4 of threatening to kill, and another charge, the details of which are suppressed. Justice Gerald Nation lifted the man's name suppression, but his lawyer indicated that decision would be appealed. Southern Response is to be investigated over whether it breached standards in dealing with Canterbury quake claims. The government agency in charge of settling the outstanding quake claims of former AMI customers in Christchurch is under investigation by the public sector watchdog, the State Services Commission. Houses have collapsed on Vanuatu's island of Ambrym as tropical cyclone Hola hit this afternoon. A Red Cross volunteer says the wind is getting very strong and the roof of a school classroom has blown out already, but the children appear to be safe. Mr Kimmy says most people are well prepared for the Category 2 cyclone and he expects more families to arrive at the evacuation centres this evening. And Dunedin man Jason Blackler has been found guilty of manslaughter over the death of his friend and flatmate. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Yes, for keeping an eye on Hola as it passes over Vanuatu, and we're getting so much feedback from Christchurch, some of it raw. Strikingly raw. Thank you. We will bring you a sample of it shortly. But Nona Peltier
I don't have anything to say about Christchurch.
No.
Well, maybe a little bit. You never know.
Well, but I do want to talk to you about the fourth quarter economic growth jigsaw puzzle, right? The last sort of pieces have fallen into place. We've been looking at the message we've received from all of this information, and you can tell us really where we stand, can you?
Yes, I can. I tell you, we have had some additional information today. So it's a lot of pieces that go into the gross domestic product, which tells us how the economy is done. Now, the GDP numbers that we get from the Department of Statistics are really quite old, but so that's because the numbers kind of come out over time. So we've just got a couple more numbers today. We had the building sector and the wholesale numbers. So wholesale sales numbers, and those numbers showed that, there was a bit of a pickup there towards the end of last year. And so that's quite good. The value of wholesale...
Is that just a seasonal pickup, or is that year on year? So pickup...
No, it's a quarterly number, so it rose 3% on the previous quarter.
Okay.
So that's pretty good. It says that the wholesale numbers are good. That means that the
retailers,
products, that's pretty good.
Yep.
And then we had the numbers on the building sector. This is work that's put in place. So it's different than consents. It's not an intention to build. It's actually starting to build, breaking ground, so to speak. So those numbers were also pretty strong. And as a result of that, volume of building work put in place rose 1.4%. So, again, with construction in the commercial sector outpacing residential. And so as a result of that...
Gosh, 1.4% is still bloody low in the context of the work, the housing building that we've been promised, right? The houses that are going to suddenly solve...
It's the constraints and and we've seen this time and time again. There's so much constraint in the construction sector, not just in labor, but also materials too. I spoke with the managing director of China Construction New Zealand a couple of weeks ago. Oh, was it that long? And anyway, he said that the people are knocking on his door, but they're really careful about what jobs they're taking on. So a really big construction company like them are standing back and going, okay, we'll have to have a good look at this and see how it goes. So meanwhile, our gross domestic product is likely to have grown by 0.3% in the 3 months ended December to an annual rate of just over 3%. That's pretty healthy. And we'll get those numbers next Thursday. So just over a week from now.
Interesting to see the Reserve Bank's response to them too, right?
Right.
More fallout from CBL Insurance. Were you talking about this? Was John or Giles?
We just keep talking about it. I tell you.
Forced into administration by the Reserve Bank last month. Right. What's the latest on that?
Well, so they're reinsurance companies, and what they used to do was offer a product called built-in warranty. So it's a product you buy to insure your house against defects. It's a warranty for new products, houses. And the builders and so on would sell them on, and so that would give you some assurance. Well, it turns out those built-in policies were reinsured by CBL, and CBL will not be paying off on those if something should happen. So about 1,000 people have these policies, and now they're really without cover, effectively. So another company has come in. They're an underwriter for Lloyd's. That's called Stamford Insurance, and they've got the go-ahead from Lloyd's to underwrite this product. And so all you need to do if you have a built-in policy is contact your built-in insurer and then see what you can do. Switch. It's going to cost you, though. It's not for nothing.
Yeah, Lloyd's. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And we're going to keep bringing more stories on CBL. We haven't heard the last of this, that's for sure.
Thanks, Nona. What did the markets do today?
Well, the markets weren't that great, and that's partly because of the uncertainty that Donald Trump's on-again, off-again trade policy. No one's exactly sure what's going on there. Is he bluffing? Is he not bluffing? Who knows? Meanwhile, our top 50 index fell 0.5%, 43 points down to 8,284, and that's pretty much in line with what we're seeing in Asia. The Kiwi dollar was steady most of the day. It's just slightly off a little bit this afternoon. 72.8 US cents, 93.3 Australian, and 52.4 pence.
Nona Peltier, lovely to have you back. Thanks very much indeed. Nona, fairly mixed old situation on the weather across the country. Let's check in with Meteo meteorologist John Law. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. Well, very much like today, Thursday is shaping up to be a tale of two islands. More showers and some thunderstorms and even some heavy rainfall across the North Island. Rather a showery day in Auckland, but still some good bright spells between them. Highs around about 24 degrees Celsius. And that's really the same sort of story down in towards Waikato and the Bay of Plenty. Some showers, some of which could be heavy, perhaps even with the odd rumble of thunder. But we are going to find still some longer spells of rain across those southern parts of the North Island Rather a cloudy day in Wellington, occasional rain, but some heavier rainfall likely to be the other side of the hills out in towards the Wairarapa, still with that severe weather warning through the rest of Wednesday. And we are going to keep hold of that wet weather pushing up in towards Hawke's Bay and Gisborne as well. Elsewhere, still some showers, but the rain easing off through the Wairarapa in the afternoon. For the South Island, it's a different story. There's plenty of dry weather in place and even some decent spells of sunshine. There'll still be a few showers that run up that eastern coast in towards the likes of perhaps Christchurch and more especially down in towards Dunedin. But for most spots, it's set to stay dry. And the best of the sunshine out on that western coast. A great looking day in Greymouth with highs here around about 21 degrees Celsius. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much indeed, John. It is not it from you, though, because your feedback is flooding in tonight. And if you are in the rest of the country and haven't had much experience of life in Christchurch since 2011, you would be shocked by just how raw some of the texts we are receiving are. Those of you who are still immersed in the process of getting a full and final settlement, we are giving you a call directly. But let's listen to some of you who are reflecting on experiences, and this is a pretty good representative sample. John, EQC said 60,000 to repair beloved red stickered house. 60,000. Two privately commissioned surveys said 240 and 260,000 after 2 years of anxiety, upset, depression, culminating in taking EQC to court. EQC capitulated on the day the case was to be heard, finally admitting their error. Is it any wonder that for many in Christchurch, EQC and its functionaries are despised, which is a strong word, but there are lots of strong feelings coming in tonight. John, look at what happened deeper. Look at this. EQC gave Fletcher's the scope of work, say, worth $70,000. The P&G margin was approximately 30% of $70,000 or about 30% of any of the claims. Here's the hooker. Fletcher's pushed the claim down to $10,000. They still got the P&G in margin, 30% of the $70,000. So it was in their interest to pull out of works. It was in their interest to pull works out of the scope. They still made money for doing less, and EQC saved money. And that's what they did day after day. Now, I'm not quite sure that I read that very well, or it says exactly what you wanted it to say, but I know the point you're making. And what's really interesting here is that once the claims went over scope, which was $100,000, and once they went, over cap, then they moved from the home repairs program and EQC's control into the insurers, the private insurers, who could pick whoever they wanted to do whatever rebuilds were going to be required. And of course, EQC were being paid commission or percentage margins on the work they were doing. So we're going to look at the process by which properties remained under cap, thereby staying under the governance of Fletcher's over the weeks ahead. Jacinda Ardern has spent the day in Tonga visiting a school that was badly hit by Cyclone Gita as the New Zealand government unveiled an extra $10 million in immediate aid for the kingdom. It's less than a month since Tonga was battered by the cyclone, which destroyed hundreds of homes and its 125-year-old parliament building, and damaged more than half of its schools. That's on the main island. Although the purpose of the trip is to introduce Ms Ardern to Pacific leaders, questions about China and its influence in the region through the hundreds of millions of dollars of aid it hands out have never been far away. Our political reporter May Heron reports from the Tongan capital Nuku'alofa.
Children lined the driveway of Whasi Government School in Nuku'alofa and sat in makeshift tents as they welcomed Jacinda Ardern today. The Prime Minister was visibly taken aback to see firsthand just how bad the damage was from Cyclone Gita. Here at Whasi School, several classrooms are badly damaged. Music blares outside as Jacinda Ardern walks inside one of the classrooms. This one has no roof, all the beams are exposed and the wood is now rotting. She turns to me and says, "You can still see all the pictures on the walls." The children have been forced to work outside in packed tents, supplied by UNICEF and shipped from New Zealand.
But you can see the effort that the teachers have made to, put posters up and the children's work up. But in a tent like the ones they have here, where they have two classrooms working together, so 60 students, the teachers are telling me they alternate between reading and oral work to try and not disturb one another. It still must be very hard for the kids to concentrate in there, particularly with the heat.
The principal, Pomana Hui, says she hoped New Zealand would rebuild the classrooms.
We encourage the kids,
This is the things that we have now, and wait for the next time. Maybe someone come and help us to rebuild our house for the future.
And today the government announced help was coming in form of $7 million to help schools and an extra $3 million for fixing power lines. Jacinda Ardern met with the Tongan Prime Minister Akalisi Pohiva this morning and described the discussions as really positive. But two prominent Tongans are out of the country, the Tongan King and Deputy Prime Minister, both visiting China, which has committed aid of more than $170 million, much of it in loans in the 10 years to 2016. The International Monetary Fund has noted that Tonga, Samoa and Vanuatu all have significant debt to China, but Jacinda Ardern says that topic was not discussed with the Tongan Prime Minister today.
Our focus has been on New Zealand's relationship with Tonga rather than Tonga's relationship with anyone else.
Foreign Minister Winston Peters has also announced $11 million of funding to complete the first stage of the upgrade to Nuku'alofa's electricity network. The Tongan Power Chief Executive Robert Matthews says most of the CBD, where 4,000 people are still without power, is still on the old network, and an upgrade would make a big difference.
As compared to that old system that you see up there, which is a whole bunch of separate cables, so now they're all combined into one big cable. So normally that would take, could take days to restore a whole street like that. So it happened within just minutes.
It was another fleeting visit to Tonga. Jacinda Ardern is now heading to Rarotonga, the last stop on her Pacific mission trip. In Nuku'alofa for Checkpoint, May Heron.
New Zealand are chasing a gigantic total. England batted first and set a formidable target in the one-dayer in Dunedin. They're still up against it, but Ross Taylor's just brought up a ton. They are 3 down. I think they need about 10 runs and over the final 15. Gosh, he's been a magnificent Nick for a few seasons now, hasn't he, Ross Taylor? We'll keep an eye on New Zealand's pursuit of a pretty good English total. Remember, New Zealand have to win this to keep the series alive. The group set up to decide on the first marine reserves on the Otago coast has failed to agree and has handed in 2 competing plans. The South East Marine Protection Forum met for 3 years to identify areas to protect on the coast between Timaru and Waipapa Point in Southland. The Fisheries and Conservation Ministers released the forum's 300-page report late this afternoon. But fishing industry representatives, environmentalists both say the process is a massive disappointment. Looking at this, here's our Otago Southland reporter Ian Telfer.
After 3 years of work, weeks of tough debate and crunching through a record 2,800 submissions, no one could say the South East Marine Protection Forum did not try hard. Yet in the end, nearly everyone is unhappy. The forum's chairperson, Marie Baker-Galloway, says it was the hardest piece of work she's ever done. But in the end, they just could not agree.
One of the terms of reference was to endeavour to reach a consensus position, and we endeavoured to reach that position, but ultimately couldn't reach agreement on one recommended network, and so that's why we've ended up with 2 alternative networks, one network supported by one part of the forum and the other network supported by the other part of the forum.
The proposal put in by environmental and tourism representatives would cover more than 1,200 square kilometres, with 6 marine reserves and 5 lesser protected areas, covering 14% of the southeast coast. The rival proposal, led by the commercial fishing industry, is less than a third of that size. Forest and Bird had a representative on the forum, but its marine advocate, Anton van Helden, says the result's a huge letdown, especially because the Catlins coast gets not one bit of protection from either plan.
I think everybody in the room probably gave it their all, but I think at the end of the day, if what they've delivered doesn't meet the terms of reference, then they've clearly failed, and that means there's something wrong, inherently wrong with the process.
Simon Gilmore from the rock lobster industry was on the forum as a commercial fishing representative. He says it was a very hard 3 years of meetings, and from the start the industry got railroaded.
The priority with this process was identify the habitats and put a reserve over them, close them to fishing. When fishing hasn't caused the problem, why do you focus on fishing?
The fishing industry says the larger proposal will be detrimental for marine life because it would compress fishing into the remaining areas and deplete them of stocks. A Ngāi Tahu representative, Edward Ellison, says he knows there's disappointment, but the process was not a waste of time. He says consensus means give and take.
What we gave up, we gave up. What we retained, we retained. So I think from a tangata whenua point of view, it was a very good process but not without its pain.
But the industry does not accept that. It's so unhappy it tried to harpoon the report after it was sent to ministers, telling them it's biased and the fishing solution's been misrepresented. That's appalled the other forum members. Chairperson Ms Baker Galloway says the fishing industry's move was surprising and disappointing. And releasing the report today, the Minister of Fisheries, Stuart Nash, was very critical.
For 3 years they had the opportunity to say, we have major concerns about this, we have major concerns in the way the forum is heading, or terms of reference, or anything, any concerns, but they didn't. To then come out and say, we have concerns, they had plenty of time to do it, and that is not the time to do this.
The ministers say they'll consider the report carefully and consult the public again before any decisions are made. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
Just quickly before we move on, a lovely text from Kate and Dirk saying, what is your email address, with a smiley face on it? Kate and Dirk, it is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we look forward to hearing from you. Nationals leader has wasted no time in appointing a new finance spokesperson, Amy Adams. The Selwyn MP will be ranked third in caucus behind Simon Bridges and Paula Bennett, the deputy. Of course, the former Associate Finance Minister's appointment comes a day after her predecessor, Stephen Joyce, announced he was quitting Parliament and he'd been told he wouldn't be getting the job. Speaking to reporters in Christchurch, Ms Adams was asked how she compares to Mr Joyce and, of course, Bill English.
Well, look, both Stephen Joyce and Bill English before him have been outstanding finance ministers and finance spokespeople. I would certainly not want to move away significantly from the work that National's been doing under both of those gentlemen. We're a team. The policies we've been running are the policies of us all. But I guess my approach is certainly one of listening and reflecting and making the connection with New Zealanders that actually when we talk about economic growth, when we talk about strong fiscal management, it's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. It's about ensuring New Zealanders can have the jobs they want, good incomes, opportunities. And actually, if you think about all of the things that New Zealand treasures, whether it's the environment, whether it's standard of living, all of those things are underpinned by a strong economy.
Is there an $11.7 billion hole in the government's plan?
Well, I think the point we were making during the election campaign, and it's one we haven't resiled from, is that the numbers they put out simply didn't allow for the pressures that they will face and are already facing in government. So we know that governments face considerable pressures around demographic changes, around inflationary costs, just in the cost pressures of running the country, not to mention all of the initiatives that they will want to run. And what was really clear to us is that they hadn't allowed for any of that in their costings. So what we said in the campaign and what we stick with is that the costings they put out didn't allow them a single extra dollar to manage any of those cost pressures, and if they were going to manage them in the way that we thought would be a conservative estimate of what was required, then that was a sort of gap. Actually, listening to the speech from the throne, which had 51 expensive promises included in it, I think you might find that those pressures become even tighter. And early signs from Grant Robertson that he's already scrimping and saving, cutting valuable programs to make up that shortfall.
Do you still think the gap is that big? I mean, it's quite an extreme amount.
Look, I wouldn't be surprised if the gap ends up being considerably more than that. If you look at what they will be required to spend to fund demographic pressures, cost pressures, and their very expensive commitments that they've made through the campaign, in the speech from the throne and since. I mean, the numbers that the government's put out already are very, very light on costings. Now, whether they haven't worked out the costs or they know them and haven't included them, neither is acceptable. I think New Zealand needs to be told exactly what the costs are of these very, very expensive commitments the government's made that they haven't fronted up on. Already, we know that debt is going to be $10 billion higher by 2022 under this government, and that's before they include the cost of things like the $15 billion light rail system, the Dunedin hospital upgrade, Waikeria prison, the provincial growth fund. So we're talking big, big numbers of things that aren't included in the numbers, and even with what we have seen, it's $10 billion more than would have been the case under National. So this government is being very big on talk, very big on promises, but very light on detail.
Amy Adams, the UK says it will robustly respond to any evidence of Russian involvement in the collapse of a former spy, Sergei Skripal. Mr Skripal and his daughter Ulia are critically ill in hospital after being found unconscious in Salisbury in Wiltshire. Russia has denied any involvement. The BBC's Tom Simons has the latest from Salisbury.
The Maltings is an open area of green space and water, surrounded by shops at the centre of Salisbury. CCTV images obtained by the BBC appear to show Sergei Skripal arriving at 3:47 on Sunday with his daughter Yulia alongside. The emergency services were called at 4:15. The pair had been struck down by something unknown. Eyewitness Jamie Payne described what happened.
The lady sort of passed out. Her eyes were just completely white. They were wide open but just white and frothing at the mouth. And then the man went stiff. His arms stopped moving, but he's still looking dead straight. Police came about 5 minutes, 10 minutes later. And then the man started throwing up.
They remain in a critical condition in hospital. Yulia Skripal lives in Russia but had been visiting her father. Sergei Skripal's wife, elder brother and his son have died in recent years. The family believe in suspicious circumstances. Wiltshire Police, a small force, has led the investigation so far. But Chief Constable Keir Pritchard announced that would change.
The Metropolitan Police have confirmed that due to the unusual circumstances, the counter-terrorism network will be leading this investigation, as it has the specialist capability and expertise to do so. It is important to reiterate they have not declared this as a terrorist incident.
A restaurant and a pub have been sealed off as a precaution, and experts at the government's laboratory at Porton Down have been advising the police on the range of possible substances involved. Alistair Hay is Professor of Toxicology at Leeds University.
They will be taking blood, urine, saliva samples, and they will be testing them for a range of chemicals. They will put some through screening tests, and if those screens identify particular classes of chemicals, then they will look at something in more detail. There are some screening techniques that you can do in about half an hour. There are others that take a few hours. There are some that may even take days.
And police have confirmed that several officers have been examined in hospital after dealing with the incident. The investigation will also look at what contacts Sergei Skripal has had recently with anyone who might have wanted to harm him. He arrived in the UK in 2010, having been released from a Russian prison where he was serving a sentence for high treason. The allegation was that he was a British spy. But he does not appear to have been trying to hide from anyone. He's been living in Salisbury under his own name for years.
The BBC's Tom Simons with that report. Back in Aotearoa, a 73-year-old says she'll now be able to see the dentist for the first time instead of pulling out her teeth after her Auckland iwi announced plans to provide free health insurance for all its members. A decision by Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei to ensure its 4,000 members is being welcomed by the iwi's kaumātua, many of whom have been unable to afford to visit a dentist or a doctor. The deal also covers pre-existing conditions, physio and optometrist appointments. John Boynton visited the Ōrākei marae to meet two of the iwi's benefactors.
Meha Hawke has had her share of health struggles over the years, including open heart surgery. When I arrive at the Ōrākei marae, the 73-year-old has just stepped off the bus from her weekly shopping trip. She's never had health insurance and tells me she's still figuring out the ins and outs of what the plan will mean for her.
In terms of dentists and doctors' visits, have you had that in the past?
No.
Because the insurance will provide all that now?
No, I only go to the doctors every 3 months. I haven't been to the dentist. I pulled my own teeth out.
Meha Hawke told me a cyst in her stomach went undiscovered and untreated for almost 3 years before it had to be removed. Health insurance will ensure this doesn't happen again.
I'm one of the lucky ones that didn't die, and I end up getting it for nothing. But you wait 2.5 years in pain.
Meha's daughter is Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei chairperson Marama Royal. She is holding her mokopuna, waiting to walk her mum back to her kaumātua flat. She's thrilled her mum will now have choices in her medical treatment.
She can choose to go to a doctor in Remuera, she can choose to go to one in Mission Bay, Kohimarama, Meadowbank, in town, and she won't have to wait because her insurance will give her that.
And Meha Hawke says she's looking forward to the benefits of having instant access to doctors and specialists.
I've been waiting for varicose veins since I've been 20-something.
Through this health insurance, through Ngāti Whātua, she can now go and get that done.
Kia ora, it's Koro Temepara here. Can you come and fix my toe? We'll be right there.
Temepara Morehu is another kaumātua who signed up to the health insurance plan. The 70-year-old who suffers from arthritis has just come out of the hospital after suffering septicemia. He's excited about the new health insurance cover.
This is the first time in my life where pre-existing conditions are part of the norm, so that now the norm becomes, I've got cancer, or I've got an infection in my hip, or I've got something wrong with me, and we have somebody in our organisation now who says, "Thanks, walk this way."
The iwi currently has 250 kaumātua who are registered as members, and Temepara Morehu knows many of them don't want to be a burden on their whānau.
Older people don't want to put anybody out. You don't want to step in anybody's ways. Go and live with your kids. I don't even want to live with my kids because I don't want to interfere with their life.
The health cover, he says, will provide kaumātua peace of mind.
There's always this background feeling is that I have to get on with it myself. But now the health is taken care of. That's one less worry. So one less worry is a plus.
The insurance will be available to all 4,000 New Zealand-based Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei members and will be available from next month. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko John Boynton aho.
Thanks, John. In the cricket, New Zealand 227 for 3, chasing England's 335. 9 runs and over required.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. There have been further revelations tonight on the inadequacy of assessments done by EQC on quake-damaged homes in Christchurch. Yesterday, the former head of Fletcher Construction, Mark Binns, told Checkpoint there were probably unqualified people carrying out checks on people's houses. This evening, a former works manager for Fletcher EQR, who's asked not to be named, told the program assessors did not check behind walls or under floors to examine the true extent of damage because there wasn't time. He said managers had to complete a set number of repairs each month and things were rushed.
And when you broke that down to each supervisor, they had to be signing off X number of jobs of X value each month. I know that good managers left because of the frustration that there was there.
The former works manager says repairs were signed off as completed on homes that still had damage. The Fisheries Minister has criticised the fishing industry for trying to block the release of a Marine Reserves report they were part of writing. The government released the 300-page report of the South East Marine Protection Forum this afternoon after 3 years of work. The forum failed to reach consensus on where to put the Otago Coast's first marine reserves, instead handing in 2 alternative proposals. The proposals by the environmental and tourism representatives aims to protect 14% of the coastline, and one from the commercial fishing industry proposes cover for 4% of the coast. The fishing industry asked the minister to review the process after the final report was sent, saying it is biased, but Stuart Nash says he's not impressed.
For 3 years, they had the opportunity to say, we have major concerns about this, we have major concerns in the way the forum is heading, or terms of reference, or anything, any concerns, but they didn't. To then come out and say, we have concerns, they had plenty of time to do it, and that is not the time to do this.
Stuart Nash says the government thought the forum had consensus and is disappointed at the breakdown. A Haast local says the establishment of cell phone coverage in the West Coast town and parts of State Highway 6 this year will save lives. Haast is in the middle of a 244-kilometre long mobile coverage black spot that runs from Fox Glacier to Lake Hawea. Locals say it means people in serious accidents can't use cell phones to call for help. The Communications Minister, Claire Curran, says a 3G cell tower will be in the town by the end of May, and 6 to 8 small roadside mobile sites will be in place along the highway by the end of the year. Blair Farmer, a Haast business owner and St John volunteer, says the news has been long awaited.
The greatest thing is going to be a safer highway with greater response times for all of the emergency services, etc. There could have been far greater, more positive patient outcomes for many, many people over a long number of years.
Haast resident Blair Farmer. The British government's top emergency committee will meet in the next few hours to discuss the investigation into a poisoning incident that left a former Russian spy and his daughter critically ill. Sergei and Yulia Skripal were found slumped on a bench in the UK city of Salisbury 2 days ago. The BBC's Tom Simons reports.
Overnight in the centre of the city, there was a noticeable increase in police activity. A pub and a restaurant had both been secured following the suspected poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Counter-terrorism officers are now running the investigation, and the case is expected to be discussed at this morning's Government Security Committee meeting. But other than assurances that there is no risk to the public, neither the police nor health agencies have said anything to suggest they have identified the substance suspected of being used to poison the victims.
Tom Simons reporting. National's new finance spokesperson Amy Adams says her focus will be on government policies that threaten the continued growth of the economy. The party's leader Simon Bridges has appointed Ms Adams to the finance portfolio ahead of the broader caucus reshuffle. She'll also be ranked third in the caucus behind Mr Bridges and the Deputy Leader Paula Bennett. Ms Adams was asked about National's claim of an $11.7 billion fiscal hole in the government's books.
Well, I think the point we were making during the election campaign, and it's one we haven't resiled from, is that the numbers they put out simply didn't allow for the pressures that they will face and are already facing in government. So we know that governments face considerable pressures around demographic changes, around inflationary costs, just in the cost pressures of running the country.
National News finance spokesperson Amy Adams. A new albatross family is starring on the Department of Conservation's Royal Albatross Cam on the Otago Peninsula. Albatrosses Woe and Go have been together since 2015 and are now fostering a recently hatched female chick which was deserted as an egg. It comes shortly after tragedy struck the colony, with a parent bird killing its chick in January. A DOC spokesperson, Nicola Toki, says that was very upsetting for albatross camera fans and the rangers. But she says things are looking good for the new chick, who's been guarded by Woe and Go. Ms Toki says the extreme weather means they have less than half the number of chicks as last year. It's 6:05. Sport. Ross Taylor has scored his 19th one-day international century as New Zealand chased 336 to beat England in the 4th one-day cricket international in Dunedin. England made 335 for 9 in their 50 overs, and New Zealand's run chase began disastrously to be 2 for 2 at one stage, but they've recovered to be 219 for 3 in the 37th over. Taylor a short time ago was on 107, having put on 135 with Tom Latham for the 4th wicket. Latham was on 61. New Zealand need to win the match to keep the 5-match series alive. The newly appointed Hurricanes head coach John Plumtree says he's always coveted the job but has aspirations to go further and coach the All Blacks. Plumtree, who's currently the side's assistant coach, will replace Chris Boyd from next year, with Boyd off to England club Northampton. Plumtree, a former Taranaki flanker, has plenty of international coaching experience, having been head coach of the South African side the Sharks and forwards coach with Ireland.
I'm absolutely delighted with my appointment. For a long time now I've had the Hurricanes head coaching role in my sights. I've had to go around the world a couple of times before it's happened, but I feel absolutely privileged.
John Plumtree, that's the news.
Battling a blaze.
Still got plenty of stuff that gets their attention. A few little explosions going off, canisters, bits and pieces that are in that pile of metal.
Trade war fears.
Everyone's now pacing the room and wondering what the hell is happening.
Is this particularly worrying?
Oh, hell yes.
A fond farewell.
I asked my little girl, who's 10, what she thought of Daddy leaving Parliament, and she looked at me and said, oh, well, you'll get more time to take me to school each day, so that'll be good.
It's a journey. Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, new research on the impact of obesity on the environment. And after 10, Stanley Johnson on Brexit, his famous son Boris, and his latest political thriller Compromat. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow night. Northland to Waikato and Bay of Plenty, also Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay. Occasional showers, some heavy with isolated thunderstorms. For the remainder of the North Island, Waitomo and Southern Hawke's Bay to Wellington and Wairarapa, periods of rain, some heavy with isolated thundery downpours possible in the north, rain easing west of the main ranges tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough cloudy with patchy rain, especially about Golden Bay and coastal Marlborough, clearing tomorrow. Canterbury fine spells and isolated showers. Bulla to Fiordland fine with high cloud about Bulla. Otago and Southland mainly fine. However, a few showers spreading north this afternoon and evening, and a few showers again tomorrow evening. And for the Chatham Islands, rain developing around evening time. It is 6:08, and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Did you update the cricket? Did you?
Was much as I had.
Right, okay, gosh, it's fascinating. What a contest. I'm just going to tell you the latest. Yes. New Zealand 241 for 3 after 39 overs, chasing 335. Great knock by England. Taylor still on, heading towards 120, I think.
Oh,
so New Zealand need 95 runs and 65 balls.
Is Latham still there?
Latham is still there.
Nice, very good. Good partnership.
Yeah, what a great game. Thanks everyone for being with us. Let's return now to the story we began the program with tonight. EQC and the increasing number of issues it's dealing with regarding botched repairs, and this is what we've been looking at on Checkpoint over the past few nights, repairs that weren't done because the first EQC scopes after the earthquakes didn't notice the damage, often to foundations beneath floors the people doing the scopes hadn't looked under. We've spoken to people who bought properties sold as sound on the basis of EQC repairs, but neither the vendor nor the purchaser knew the scoping process had missed serious damage. Last night we heard from the former Fletcher Construction CEO who signed the contract with EQC, which put Fletcher's in charge of the rebuild program. Mark Binns told us some of the early EQC scopes were done too quickly and by people not qualified to do them. Tonight we heard from a works manager involved in the rebuild for 4 years from the beginning of 2011 who said that even when they knew damage had just been found, so missed in the scopes but found by contractors, it was sometimes hard to get scopes changed. All of this is emerging in more and more detail 7 years after the major earthquake. I spoke to the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, shortly before we came on air.
What is clear, and something that John, isn't a surprise to me, and it wouldn't be a surprise to anyone to know that I thought it, that there were some problems at the beginning of this, how the jobs were scoped up, the initial assessments. But what I'm really focused on now is working with Sid Miller and working with the new interim chair and putting a plan in place to actually get these final claims settled. There's 2,500 people and families out there that can't get on with their lives, and that's my absolute focus.
And in all cases, they are not dealing with EQC or their insurer for the first time, are they? This is remedial stuff. This is return visits.
That's right. That more than half of those 2,600 are re-repairs. There's a variety of categories in there, but a lot of these are the repairs that failed.
Re-repairs is something of a misnomer, isn't it? Because in fact, what we're learning is that many of the repairs simply weren't done. So there was cosmetic work done, cracks in the walls plastered over, paint done, chimneys repaired. But actually what a lot of these homes are confronting is structural damage beneath the floor, and this is the first time, in many cases, these homeowners knew they had that structural damage.
That's right, that re-repairs is a bit of a catch-all phrase for something that's much broader than something that's got to go back and be re-repaired again. As you say, that it is work that was initially missed. So it's a word that covers a very broad range of things that EQC needs to look at.
The work was initially missed. Inevitably, work was going to be initially missed when 182,000 rapid assessments, scopes in other words, were done in the period of 4 months after those February quakes. But what we are learning now is that after that, as contractors went in and found that the scopes had missed damage, it was very hard to get a variation to the scopes. In other words, whistleblowing was taking place, but not always being listened to.
Look, and I know as a local MP that was working with constituents coming in that often it was people wanting to have their scope of work re-looked at. But what I'm concentrating on now with the work that Anita's working on and Sid Miller is working through is how to get these claims settled. What our independent inquiry into EQC will go back and look at what happened and how we can do that better in the future. I think one of the things that everybody down here in Canterbury wants to ensure is that we learn from what we went through, and that when or if another community in New Zealand has to go through this again, that we can do it better. Because I think everyone would agree that there's things that we can do better, and we need to learn from what we did well and what went wrong.
What is your understanding of what went wrong now? And I know you, the inquiry hasn't happened, you only have a new chair, you've only been the minister for a short time, but what do you think went most wrong?
Look, John, I've talked to you about some of those things before. I think that we can take it back to some of the scopes of work that were done. The fact that actually this was a huge task for an organisation that was only a few people that had to scale up and do it. But that's kind of my hunch, and that's the anecdotes and the kinds of things that I think that everybody in Canterbury has an opinion around some of those things. But it's precisely the reason why I want to do the work of having an independent inquiry, so we can have a systematic look at this, and it's not just people's hunches and what people suspect, but we can properly learn from this, and we can make the changes that we need to make, whether that's to the legislation or the plan around how we prepare for readiness in the future.
Are you surprised EQC indemnified Fletcher's, and I quote, for all costs and expenses FCC may suffer and for any claims made against FCC?
Well, look, this was the story around the indemnity of Fletcher's and that occurred in their contract was something that was being talked about for a number of years. I think the press were doing stories on it back in 2015, that it was something that was out there. That I think that Fletcher's didn't want to carry the risk, and the last government indemnified them against that. So what we have now is an issue that we have to work through of how it is that we can get through and get people's houses repaired, because that has to be my primary focus.
At no cost to the homeowners who after 7 years are still waiting for these repairs to be done?
Oh, look, this has to be that people are still waiting for their repairs to be done properly and what they're entitled to under the Act. And that's what I've always said, that this is about the fair and swift settlement of claims. This is what people are, what they are fairly entitled to under our legislation. And that is my focus, is making sure that they do get those repairs done.
Megan Woods, people have been hearing some of that stuff for 7 years now. We are going to keep an eye on progress here, and we are looking in depth at that contract which we've obtained exclusively between FCC, Fletcher Construction and EQC. Just updating the cricket, New Zealand needs 77 runs and 57 balls to win. Taylor 144 not out, and Tom Latham there on 70 not out, chasing England's really impressive total of 335. What a game that is. It could take another day before a fire that's burning on a 1,600-tonne pile of scrap metal in Auckland is put out. Fire and Emergency says James Fletcher Drive in the suburb of Favona is going to be closed until at least midday tomorrow. A few traffic issues in that area at the moment. Jessie Chang reports.
It took around 80 firefighters to bring the blaze, which started around 2 o'clock this morning, under control. As daylight broke at Sims Pacific Metals in Favona in South Auckland, it became clear that the thick plumes of smoke were going to stick around for some time. Just around the corner on McGee Street, Leilani Miropai heard small explosions coming from the area.
I saw the fire this morning about 8:30ish after I dropped off the kids to school. Then I came over to my mum's and then I noticed the big ball of smoke that was happening there. I was concerned because how my mum and them stay really close to where the fire is actually at.
The burning mound of chopped up car parts in whiteware is about 80 metres long, 50 metres wide and 12 metres deep. One man said it's the largest fire he's seen.
I don't know if it's close to the place that I work in, so not really sure what's happening with what's the extent of the fire. I've rang my team members and they say I told them to go home, so I am just on standby whatever happens.
Fire and Emergency says about 60 firefighters are still on the scene and will be working into the night. James Fletcher Drive and Kaka Street are closed because hose lines with water are being run in and there are fire trucks parked on the street. And while locals hope the roads will open soon, Assistant Fire Commander Mike Shaw says it could take another day before the fire is put out. He says there are diggers moving through the huge pile of metal to get to the heart of the blaze, but it's a slow process.
We're making good progress, but at the progress that we're making, it's at least going to be probably the end of the day tomorrow, and it could be longer.
Fire and Emergency says residents do not need to be worried about the smoke because there are no hazardous goods or chemicals, but it is encouraging people to keep their windows and doors shut. Otahuhu College kept students inside at lunchtime due to the smell of fumes and sent them home 30 minutes early today. Sims Pacific Metal has not responded to requests for comment. In Auckland, for Checkpoint, call Jessie Chang, TNA.
Delays in distributing relief supplies and doing damage assessments are adding to anxieties for quake-affected communities in Papua New Guinea's highlands. It's now 10 days since the 7.5 magnitude earthquake struck in remote Hela province, killing at least 80 people. Buildings have collapsed and the quake also triggered mass landslides in the region. Johnny Blades from RNZ Pacific has more.
Confusion, exhaustion and fear are the order of the day in Hela and neighbouring Southern Highlands provinces amid ongoing significant aftershocks. In the early hours of this morning, a magnitude 6.7 quake in the same region. Speaking from the provincial capital Tari, Hela's police commander Thomas Lavongo said there were now more people in need.
Some people got hurt and they need our help, so now we are trying to, help them, bring them up.
How do you get to them? Because the roads are so blocked, aren't they?
Church is helping us, our chopper.
Logistical help from the companies who commercialise the region's abundant oil and gas fields is vital to both relief and assessment efforts, which are heavily reliant on helicopters. The damage caused to the region's airstrips has prevented bigger planes getting in. The MP for Como, where the major quake's epicentre was, Manasa Makiba, says the response of national disaster teams has been too slow. He spoke of a region in shock.
I spent 5 days after the earthquake in Hela, and you wouldn't believe this. We will keep on feeling the earthquake. More earthquakes.
As stories trickle in from affected communities, harrowing accounts are piling up. A PNG journalist, Scott Waide, has just visited a village where 11 people died when the mountainside came crashing through their homes.
There's a kid who is in grade 5. He goes to school in Magarima, and Magarima is very far away from his village. He came back to ask his parents for school fees. On his way back, the whole family was wiped out. His siblings, his mother, his father, and an uncle have all died. So he's the only one in the family left.
While the death toll hovers near 80, there could be dozens more bodies buried by landslides. Hela people are having trouble sleeping and suspect a malign force is causing the quakes. The Como MP called for answers.
Then an independent assessment team comprising of scientists such as geologists who must carefully go around the affected areas and particularly the epicenter and establish the cause of the earthquake.
As many as 150,000 people are believed to be in urgent need of supplies, medicines, water and shelter in particular. Tari local Moses Kumingi says there's an acute need for tents because people are too afraid to stay in their homes.
Like my family, I advise all my kids and wife to stay in the open area where we have our banana garden. So if the things happen, they will go to the banana garden, so hold on to the banana and all this, so not go to the trees.
PNG's government says it's transferred money to the affected districts for the immediate dispersal of relief supplies, but Moses Kumingi says that in Tari there's little sign of this. All he can do is wait, while hoping that the even bigger quake locals all seem to fear doesn't materialise. This is Johnny Blades.
6:21. Just before we move on, Ross Taylor's brought up his 150. Quite an extraordinary effort. Guptill and Munro, who were batting first for New Zealand, were both out for 0. Taylor and Latham have now got New Zealand to 273 for 3, chasing 335 for 9 from the most appalling start. If New Zealand do win, and I'm leaning on wood, and I apologise if you're an English fan, it would be quite a remarkable fight back, but there's still a way to go. Let's move on. Women with terminal breast cancer are growing frustrated at the lack of drugs funded for them to extend their lives. In some cases, they're having to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for treatments which have been publicly funded in Australia for years. Sally Murphy spoke to 2 women facing, who say they feel they've been let down by our health system.
48-year-old mother of 2, Tracy Pay, was first diagnosed with breast cancer in 2012 and had 3 months of chemotherapy.
Then I had to go back onto chemo, so I had another 3 months of chemo. And then I had a mastectomy on the right-hand side. Then I went on to 9 months of Herceptin, had 5 weeks of radiation, but that was actually in 3 weeks because I couldn't actually organise the children for 5 weeks. After that, I went on to tamoxifen, and that's supposed to be like a preventative to help, to stop the cancer.
But that didn't stop the cancer from spreading.
I had the bone scan and I found out I had cancer in my sternum. So my cancer from my breast had metastasised into my sternum. So then I started treatment and I had 10 months of Herceptin. That actually did nothing.
After more treatment, a scan showed the cancer was now in Tracy's lung. Her oncologist told her there was not much more that could be done. Tracy was told to try Cadsilla. Since then, every 3 weeks, she gets intravenous infusions in her chest. But it's not cheap.
$9,546 every 3 weeks. $7,845 of that is the treatment, and $1,701 is oncology fees, or the time that I'm in the chair, so like for the nurse to administer the treatment.
She's managed to raise enough for 6 months of treatment, over $100,000 through a Give a Little page and fundraising events. But if Tracy lived in Australia, her situation would be much different. Cadsilla has been funded in Australia since 2015. Tracy says New Zealand is so far behind, it's leaving women like herself with few options.
If I was older and I'd lived my life and I'd seen my children grow up and had grandchildren and stuff like that, I wouldn't be so feisty about it. You know, I'd be like, okay, I've had my time. But I'm not. I'm 48. I've still got 2 children that are 16 and 12. I still want to be here to watch their hockey, you know? Oh, just don't get me started because you get me crying.
Tracy says when she got to stage 4, it's as though no one cares. She's had 2 infusions so far and will soon have a scan to see if the treatment has been successful. Joanne Rye-McGregor, who is in her 50s, is in the same predicament. A mammogram in 2010 picked up 5 tumours in her breasts. She had a double mastectomy, but 4 years later she could feel a tumour poking out of her back. The cancer had spread to her liver.
Then you find out what it's like to be stage 4 metastatic breast cancer because you just get so written off. Even the point of being told that I was stage 4, after 4 weeks, I was ringing saying, where am I on the list, please? I was ringing in hospital saying, where am I on the list to see an oncologist, please?
More chemo, tests, chemo, and then more tests, which missed the fact that the cancer had spread.
There's one more chemo on the menu, and then I'm deemed terminal. So the menu runs out. There's a point when they say that's it, they've offered as much as they can.
Joanne's only option now is to try Ibrance, a different type of chemo which costs $7,000 a month.
If I were in Malaysia, it's free. It's just interesting that living in New Zealand, it's one of the ones that we've deemed not funded. What's the logic? I would have thought that if a drug had been found and deemed successful, so it's gone through all that squillion tests that happen, how can my cousins in Australia decide it's good for their women and my country decide, yeah, nah.
Breast Cancer Aotearoa Coalition Chair Libby Burgess says frustration about the lack of drugs available here is growing.
Countries such as Australia have funded some of these medicines many years ago, and they're really breakthrough, important medicines that will make a difference to the length and the quality of life. So the amount of time that women will be able to spend with their families and whether they'll be able to be there when their kids grow up.
Ms Burgess says breast cancer experts asked for Abraxane to be funded back in 2006, but it's still sitting on the waiting list. Abraxane has been publicly funded in Australia since 2009.
An issue really that is government responsibility is that the budget is way too low for medicines. So we invest per person $186 a year and Australia invests $435. So they get a whole lot more medicines than we do.
Pharmac says it received another application for Abraxane in 2010, but it was found other funded alternatives are just as effective. It got an application for Cadsilla in August last year and for Ibrance last month. They have both been referred to experts for recommendations. Pharmac says its role is to get the best health outcomes for all New Zealanders from its budget, which for the 2017-18 year is $870 million. Tracy and Joanne say they will do everything they can to extend their lives and the quality of them. They don't hold out much hope the drugs will be funded in their lifetime, but hope other women in the future will have an easier go than they have. For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Last Friday, we brought you the story of 6-year-old deaf girl, Maisie Sly, who was on her way to Hollywood for the Oscars. The British girl from Swindon stars in the short film A Silent Child, a movie which highlights how sign language can change lives. On Monday, it won the Academy Award for Best Short Film. Its producer, Rachel Stendon, delivered her speech in sign language as Maisie watched on. The BBC's Colin Patterson reports on what's next for Maisie. And just to note, as she uses sign language, her words are translated during this item.
A star is born. 6 years old and profoundly deaf, Maisie Sly has now played the main role in an Oscar-winning film and seems to be pretty unfazed by all the attention.
Just tell me about your day at the Oscars.
I feel happy. I felt really happy.
The Silent Child is about a deaf girl struggling to communicate as her family don't want her to learn sign language. It was made by 2 former stars of the show Hollyoaks.
The Silent Child, Chris Overton and Rachel Shenton.
It won Best Live Action Short. Maisie was up on the balcony at the Oscars with her mum while her dad watched nearby with family and friends. And this was their reaction.
The Silent Child, Chris Overton.
And as for what's next, well, Maisie could return to the role. There are plans to adapt The Silent Child into a full-length feature.
Absolutely extending the film is what we would like to do next.
We asked Maisie what she wants to do next, and she said she wants to do some colouring.
Which I think is a much better answer.
Yeah.
Gold colouring?
Probably.
Maybe.
She'll be drawing a lot of pictures of Oscars, I think.
I bet she will.
Yeah.
And that was the producers of The Silent Child ending that report from Colin Patterson and indeed ending Checkpoint for this evening. Thank you everyone for being with us on behalf of our wonderful team. We hope to see you again tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A former manager for Fletcher EQR says assessors of quake-damaged homes were rushed and did not check behind walls or under floors. The State Services Commission has launched an investigation into the Southern Response Insurance Company's use of a security contractor. Law firm Russell McVeigh has appointed Dame Margaret Baisley to lead a review into sexual harassment. The Fisheries Minister has criticised his industry for trying to block the release of a marine reserves report they were part of. And the Category 2 tropical cyclone Holla is intensifying as it makes landfall in northern Vanuatu island of Ambrym. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Jerome Kern tonight on Inside Out, so get ready for great tunes including Sarah Vaughan's Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Art Pepper with The Way You Look Tonight.